The unstoppable walker, the descent. 7 million years ago, in the heart of the Miocene epoch, the world was a kingdom of emerald. In Central Africa, the air was thick with the heavy scent of damp earth and blooming orchids. Here lived Kibo, a primate of the high canopy. For Kibo, life was a map of interconnected branches, and his safety was measured by the strength of his grip. But the earth was changing. The great tectonic plates shifted, and the climate began to transform the landscape. The reliable rains that fed the deep forest grew sparse. Kibo watched from the heights as the vibrant green leaves of his home turned to brittle, rattling gold. The ancient forest was shrinking, pulling back like a slow tide. Kibo traveled to the very edge of the trees, arriving at the threshold of two different worlds. Behind him lay the familiar shadows of the jungle, cool and dim. Before him stretched the vast, sun-drenched savanna. The sun was a heavy amber orb, sinking toward a horizon that seemed to go on forever, casting long, dramatic shadows across the earth. The choice at the edge of the world was a heavy one. To stay in the shrinking forest meant fighting over dwindling fruit and fading territory. To leave meant stepping into the dangerous unknown of the tall grass. Kibo gripped the rough bark of the tree, his knuckles white, his flat face tilted toward the warm wind blowing from the plains. Beside him, the elder Zura appeared, moving silently through the thinning leaves. She did not speak, but her presence provided a steady comfort. Together they stood at the threshold, two small figures silhouetted against a sky streaked with the dust of a drying continent. They watched the shadows of clouds race across the golden grass below. Zura was the first to move toward the descent. With the grace of a lifetime spent in the heights, she began to climb down the massive, silver-gray trunk of the final tree. It was a journey of only 40 feet, yet it represented a departure from millions of years of ancestral tradition. She moved with purpose, her eyes fixed on the ground. Kibo followed, his heart hammering against his ribs. When his feet finally touched the soil, the sensation was startling. The earth was not soft like a branch. It was warm, gritty, and firm. He was no longer suspended in the air. He stood at the very base of the tree, the dust of the savanna coating his toes for the first time. Kibo ventured away from the trunk and into the tall grass. It rose high above his head, a rustling labyrinth of stalks that smelled of hay and sun. Every sound was magnified in the open air, the buzz of insects, the rustle of the wind. Kibo realized that in this new world, his old ways of moving would not be enough to keep him safe. Kibo and Zura paused in a small clearing. They were vulnerable here, far from the safety of the heights where no leopard could reach them. They scanned the horizon, their brows furrowed in deep concentration. The instinct to retreat to the trees was strong, but the hunger for a new future was stronger. Then, Kibo did something that would change history forever. He shifted his weight, straightened his spine, and rose onto two legs. For the first time, he could see over the grass. He took a single, courageous step forward into the golden light. He was no longer just a resident of the trees. He was the first walker, beginning a journey that would never end. The unstoppable walker, the energy revolution. 4.4 million years ago, the world had transformed once again. We are in the Afar Rift of Ethiopia, a place where the earth is pulling itself apart. The thick, endless jungles Kibo once knew are gone. In their place is a patchwork of scattered woodlands and wide, sun-scorched plains. Here lives Almaz, a distant descendant of those first brave climbers. Almaz is an Ardipithecus, a creature of two worlds. She still has the long, powerful arms of an ancestor who lived in the trees, and her big toes can still grasp branches like thumbs. But when she moves across the open ground, she does something extraordinary. She stands tall, her spine a straight line against the heat of the midday sun. The forests have become islands of green, separated by miles of golden grass. To survive, Almaz must travel from one island to the next to find enough food for her family. Walking on 4 legs is fast for a short sprint to escape danger, but Almaz has discovered that walking on 2 is a superpower for a marathon. Not everyone has embraced this new way of moving. Desta, a member of Almaz's group, still prefers the old ways. He moves by knuckle walking, leaning forward on his front calloused knuckles, while he can scramble quickly if a leopard appears. The long journey across the open rift is beginning to take its toll on him. As the sun beats down, the difference becomes clear. Desta is panting, his heavy muscles burning through his body's fuel just to keep up. Almaz, however, looks calm and steady. By balancing her weight over her hips, she uses much less energy to cover the same distance. She is the first master of the long-distance walk. Standing tall gives Almaz another vital advantage, the gift of sight. While Desta is hidden low in the grass, seeing only the stalks in front of his face, Almaz can peer over the top of the vegetation. From her high vantage point, the world is no longer a maze of yellow stems. It is a map of opportunity and danger. Suddenly, Almaz freezes. Far off in the distance, she spots a flick of a tail and the glint of a tooth. A saber-toothed cat is lurking near a watering hole. Because she can see the danger coming from far away, Almaz is able to change her course. Her height has given her the time she needs to keep her family safe. This was the first great human invention, the efficiency of the stride. Almaz isn't just walking, she is saving. Every step she takes on 2 legs is a deposit into a biological bank account. Beside her, young Caleb tries to mimic her posture, learning how to swing his legs and maintain his balance on the uneven ground. The energy Almaz saves by walking upright is the most important treasure of all. Because her body doesn't need to spend all its fuel on moving, it can send that extra energy to her growing brain. By traveling further than any other primate to find the best food, she is fueling the evolution of thought itself. The energy revolution has changed everything. Almaz and Caleb continue their journey, 2 small figures in a vast, changing world. They are the pioneers of the path, the first of many who will walk across continents. The long walk of humanity has truly begun, fueled by the simple, unstoppable power of the stride. The unstoppable walker, hands-free for the future. 3.2 million years ago, the world is a different place. We are in the rocky, sun-baked plains of Hadar. The earth is hard, the air is dry, and survival requires a new kind of magic. Amidst the heat, a small figure moves across the landscape. This is Lucy, a member of the Australopithecus family, and she is about to change everything. Lucy is not a giant. In fact, she stands barely 3.5 feet tall. But what she lacks in height, she makes up for in revolution. While her ancestors used their knuckles to help them move, Lucy walks with a stride that is entirely her own. Because she no longer needs her hands for walking, something wonderful has happened. Her hands are finally free. These free hands are the ultimate tools of the future. Lucy uses them to reach into the dry earth and pull out nutritious tubers and wild roots that others might miss. She doesn't just eat them on the spot. She gathers them in her arms, cradling the food like a precious treasure to be moved from one place to another. Lucy is joined by Hiwat, a member of her tribe. In the past, searching for food was a lonely task, but now it is a shared mission. Lucy reaches out and hands a portion of her gathered roots to Hiwat. This simple act, passing food from one pair of hands to another, is a spark of kindness that will light the way for millions of years. But hands are for more than just food. As the group moves across the scorching desert, Lucy carries a much more important bundle. She holds young Salam, a small child who isn't yet strong enough to make the long trek on her own. Because Lucy can walk upright, Salam is safe in her mother's arms, protected from the jagged rocks and the heat of the ground. Ahead, the landscape is a maze of heat and stone. Lucy stops and looks toward the horizon. She spots a shimmer of blue in the distance, a hidden spring. She raises a long, slender arm and points toward the water, signaling the direction to the rest of the family. Her hands have become a compass, guiding the way to life. Bekele, an older member of the tribe, follows Lucy's lead. He carries a heavy stone he has found, a tool for later use. In the old days, his hands would have been occupied with balance, but now he can carry the weight of his belongings without slowing down. He nods to Lucy, acknowledging her guidance as they march together. When the sun begins to set and the group finds a place to rest, the hands do not stop working. Hiawat sits beside Bekele, and they begin the important work of grooming. They use their clever fingers to clean dust from each other's fur and soothe the day's aches. This is where teamwork truly begins, not in strength, but in the power of being helpful. We were not the strongest creatures in the valley. We did not have the sharpest teeth or the fastest claws, but we had the most helpful hands. Lucy looks at the tribe she has helped lead, her eyes reflecting the orange glow of the setting sun. In those eyes, there is a spark of intelligence and a deep sense of connection to her family. The journey of the unstoppable walker continues. Lucy and Salam stand together as the stars begin to peek through the deepening blue of the sky. By freeing our hands, we freed our hearts to care for one another. The future is no longer something we just walk toward. It is something we can finally reach out and hold. The Unstoppable Walker, Part 2, The Age of Invention. For ages, our ancestors used whatever they found, a fallen branch or a jagged rock. But Kanzi and his friend, Luta, have discovered a secret. They realize that nature doesn't always provide the perfect tool. Sometimes, you have to make it. Luta watches closely as Kanzi prepares to do something that has never been done before in the history of the earth. With a sharp crack, Kanzi strikes the two stones together. He isn't trying to break them, he is trying to shape them. A thin, razor-sharp flake flies off the rock. Kanzi picks up the flake and runs his thumb carefully near the edge. It is sharper than any tooth and stronger than any claw. This is the first invention, the stone tool. This simple flake of stone changes everything. Kanzi and Luta use their new tools to reach food that was once impossible to eat. They can cut through tough hides and crack open bones for nutritious marrow. This high-energy food acts like fuel for their bodies. Because of these tools, their brains begin to grow larger and faster, sparking new ideas every day. The clock of time continues to tick, moving forward nearly 1,000,000 years. The walkers have changed again. We meet Kale, a member of the Homo erectus family. Kale is taller, leaner, and faster than Kanzi ever was. He stands fully upright, his long legs built for traveling great distances across the wide, golden savannas of Africa. But Kale and his companion, Mara, are facing a new challenge. A great storm has passed, leaving behind a red flower that eats the grass and breathes smoke. Most animals run away in terror, but Mara is curious. She has noticed that the fire brings warmth and chases away the darkness. She reaches out with a dry branch, wondering if she can capture the flower's power. Mara succeeds. She carries the fire back to their camp, keeping it alive with small twigs and leaves. This is the second great invention, the taming of fire. Now, the night is no longer a time of fear. Mara sits by the dancing flames, feeling the warmth soak into her skin as the sun dips below the horizon. Kale joins Mara by the fire, bringing food to share. They discover that when food is held over the flames, it becomes softer and easier to eat. This cooking is a miracle. It means their bodies spend less energy digesting and more energy thinking. As they eat together, the firelight creates a safe circle, a place where they can bond and plan for the tomorrow. With fire to keep them warm and tools to keep them fed, Kale feels a pull toward the horizon. He is no longer content to stay in the valley of his birth. He begins to walk, leading the way out of Africa and into the unknown lands of Europe and Asia. He is the first great explorer, driven by a curiosity to see what lies beyond the next mountain range. The journey of the unstoppable walker has reached a new height. Mara catches up to Kale, and together they look out over a vast new valley they have never seen before. By learning to change the world with their hands and master the elements with their minds, they have turned the entire earth into their home. The age of invention has begun, and the walk continues. The Unstoppable Walker, Part 3, The Great Journey and the Spark of Imagination. The world was cooling, and the forests were shrinking, but a new kind of light was glowing in the eyes of the walkers. This is Zaya. She belongs to a group called Homo sapiens, the wise humans. Zaya's mind is a theater of wonders. Unlike those who came before, she doesn't just see the world for what it is, she imagines what it could be. She stands on the high cliffs of East Africa, feeling the wind whisper of lands she has never seen. Around 70,000 years ago, a great restlessness took hold. Zaya and her friend Jiro realized that their home could no longer sustain their growing tribe. They began to talk, not just in simple grunts, but in complex patterns of sound that could describe a distant river or a hidden fruiting tree. Together, they decided to do the impossible. They would leave the land of their ancestors and follow the sun into the unknown. The Great Migration was not a single march, but a journey of 1,000 lifetimes. Zaya and Jiro led their group across scorched deserts and through narrow sea crossings. There were times when the sand stung their eyes and the water felt endless, but their resilience was stronger than the elements. They were the first to cross the Gate of Grief, moving out of Africa and into the vastness of the Arabian Peninsula. As they moved north, the air grew sharp and cold. The world was gripped by an ice age, and the walkers faced a landscape of white peaks and frozen rivers. But Jiro and Zaya did not give up. They invented bone needles to sew thick animal furs into warm clothing. They learned to track the great mammoths through the snow. They were no longer just surviving the environment, they were mastering it. One evening, driven by a biting wind, Jiro discovered a deep limestone cave tucked into a hillside. As he stepped into the darkness, holding a flickering torch, he felt a strange sensation. The cave wasn't just a shelter, it was a blank canvas. In the silence of the earth, away from the hunt and the wind, Jiro felt the spark of imagination ignite. He saw shapes in the shadows of the stone walls. Zaya joined him, bringing pigments made from crushed red earth and black charcoal. Together, they did something no creature had ever done. They created art. They painted the spirits of the bison and the grace of the horses they had seen on the plains. By putting their thoughts onto the walls, they were telling stories that would last forever. They were documenting their existence and their dreams. Imagination changed how Zaya saw herself. She found small, spiral seashells by a distant shore and used a sharp stone drill to make tiny holes in them. She threaded them onto a cord of sinew and hung them around her neck. These weren't tools for hunting or warmth, they were symbols. They told others who she was and what she valued. For the first time, humans were using objects to represent ideas. As their community grew, language became their greatest tool. Jiro met with Oren, an elder who knew the secrets of the seasons. They didn't just talk about the present, they planned for the future. Using complex sentences, they discussed where the reindeer would be in 3 moons' time, and shared secrets about which plants could heal a fever. This shared knowledge meant the tribe could act as one giant, intelligent organism. In the evenings, the spark of imagination turned into the power of story. Zaya sat with Oren by the fire, listening as the elder told tales of the great spirit of the sky and the ancestors who walked among the stars. These stories bound the people together, creating a shared history and a common culture. They weren't just a group of individuals anymore. They were a people with a soul. The unstoppable walkers continued to spread. Zaya and Jiro eventually reached the edge of a vast blue ocean. Using their imagination, they built sturdy rafts of bamboo and vine, venturing out into the waves to reach tropical islands. From the frozen north to the humid jungles and the island chains, the wise humans adapted to every corner of the planet, driven by an insatiable curiosity. Zaya looked up at the moon one night and realized that humans were unique. They were the only ones who could wonder about the stars, the only ones who could weep for a friend long gone, and the only ones who could imagine a better tomorrow. The cognitive revolution had transformed them from just another animal into the architects of the world. The journey that began with a single step millions of years ago had led to this. Jiro and Zaya stood together, looking out over a world that was now their home. They had crossed continents, mastered fire and stone, and unlocked the infinite power of the mind. The unstoppable walker had become the storyteller, the artist, and the explorer. And the most incredible part of the story? It is still being written by us. The Unstoppable Walker, Part 4, The Dawn of Civilization. The great white blankets of ice that had covered the world for thousands of years were finally pulling back. As the earth warmed, the frozen silence was replaced by the roar of rushing rivers and the rustle of new leaves. Ninher stood on a high ridge, watching the valley below turn from a pale gray to a vibrant emerald green. The world was changing, and the unstoppable walkers were ready to change with it. For as long as anyone could remember, Ninher's people had been wanderers. She and her brother Enki spent their days following the great herds of gazelle and wild cattle. They carried everything they owned, poles, skins, and stone tools, on their backs. They were experts at reading the land, but they never called any single patch of it home. To them, home was wherever they laid their heads at night. One warm afternoon, Ninher made a discovery that would change the course of human history. Near a site where they had camped the previous season, she found a patch of wild barley growing tall and thick. She remembered dropping a handful of seeds in that very spot months ago. She knelt in the rich, damp soil, her fingers gently brushing the grain. She realized the earth didn't just provide food, it could be taught to grow it. Ninher showed the seeds to Enki, and together they decided to try an experiment. Instead of moving on when the herds shifted, they stayed by the riverbank. They used sharp sticks to turn the soil and carefully press seeds into the mud. They were no longer just gathering what they found, they were becoming partners with the land. It was the first garden and the beginning of a new way of life. The harvest was a miracle. When the grain turned gold, their mother, Nanshe, helped them gather more food than the tribe had ever seen at once. They didn't have to spend every waking hour hunting. There was enough to eat, and even enough to save for the winter. Nanshe looked at the heavy bundles of grain and knew that the long era of constant wandering was coming to an end. Since they were no longer moving every week, they needed stronger shelters. Enki watched how the river mud dried in the sun and became hard like stone. He began to mix the mud with straw, shaping it into thick, sturdy blocks. He and Ninher worked side by side, stacking the sun-baked bricks to create walls that the wind could not shake and the rain could not penetrate. One house grew into 3, then 10. A village began to breathe. Nancy took charge of the communal hearth at the center of the settlement. This was a place where fire was always burning, a symbol of their permanence. The unstoppable walkers had finally stopped, and in the shadow of their mud brick walls, the very first neighborhood was born. The walkers found other friends in the valley. Enki noticed that the wild goats and sheep were drawn to the grain they grew. Instead of hunting them, he began to build enclosures of stone and wood. He offered the animals food and protection from lions, and in return, the animals provided milk and soft wool. Humans were no longer just predators. They were caretakers. With plenty of food stored in clay jars, not everyone had to work in the fields. Ninher discovered she had the time to innovate. She took the wool from their sheep and learned to twist it into long, strong threads. She built a wooden frame and began to weave. Beneath her fingers, the first fabrics appeared, soft, warm, and decorated with the patterns of the flowers she saw by the river. Enki became the village's master builder. He realized that they needed a way to keep their precious grains safe from dampness and mice. He designed a large, elevated granary with a smooth, plastered floor. He spent his days measuring and planning, his mind focused on how to make their little civilization stronger and more efficient. Innovation was the new frontier. As the sun set over the Fertile Crescent, Nancy gathered the village children. She didn't just tell stories of the Great Migration anymore. She spoke of the spirit of the seed and the song of the river. While she talked, she used a bone tool to carve symbols into a wet clay tablet, recording the number of grain sacks they had stored. This was the birth of history, written down for the very first time. Ninher and Enki stood on the flat roof of their home, looking out over the valley. In the distance, they could see the smoke from other villages rising into the twilight sky. The unstoppable walkers had crossed continents and survived ice ages, but their greatest journey was just beginning. They were no longer just survivors, they were the architects of a new world. The dawn of civilization had arrived,